Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of V Next. Today, I've got a very special guest with me, Katie King. Her and we've known each other for a couple years now, and just a really good, down to earth person that knows the artificial intelligence space inside and out. She's a published author. Actually, that's how we first got introduced, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And she's the CEO of AI in Business. Welcome.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be on your show.
Yes, it's been a long time coming. So tell me a little bit more about yourself, your journey into AI, why even get into the AI space?
Yeah, really good question to kick things off with. So, I'm 53. I've been in business for 30 years. Most of that career has been spent consulting clients, particularly the tech sector. So, I've worked over the years for everyone from Microsoft to Cisco, Alcatel, and many, many more. Um, Always evolving, always pivoting, even from being a kid. I was hungry for knowledge, as devouring a couple of books a day. My dad used to take us. We didn't have any money, but we used to go to the swap shop and swap books, and it gave me a hunger, and that thirst for knowledge has continued. And I was at the cutting edge of digital marketing for a couple of, good few years before it became really fashionable. And then I hit 50, and it felt as if everyone had caught up. Every man and his wife was a digital marketing expert. So I needed a new USP. I needed to future proof myself. And AI I saw, it was on the horizon. This is about 4 or 5 years ago. And so got involved in AI, researched it, wrote a white paper on it with two colleagues on AI in the built environment. And as you just mentioned there, wrote the book. So for those of you watching, here's a copy of the book. Here it is. And it's as you said, I interviewed incredible people like yourself with a wealth of knowledge and great brains all around the world.
Oh, by the
And
way, I've got a copy as well right here.
well done.
Always keep it at the ready.
Absolutely. So we're talking there, people like yourself, politicians, major vendors, lots and lots of technology disruptors as well. And that gave me huge insights. And that book was a game changer because all of a sudden I'd gone from having TEDx talks and speaking at conferences, but now I had some really cool, very cutting edge IP. And so, again, that's where I've been the last few years, keynote speaking, training, consulting, and so on. So it was really not necessity, but it was an opportunity to to future proof myself, and in so doing help other organizations to really consider their digital transformation.
Yeah, I love the idea of future proofing yourself. I think that is so important, and what I really respect about you as an individual is you were self aware, and you're like, hey, wait a second, my skills might be getting a little stale. People are catching up. Um, you know, I don't have a certain level of differentiation, and I'm going to go into this area that I know nothing about and just jump in the deep end.
Spot on.
Yeah,
Yep.
and for the American listeners, um, Katie, what's a swap shop?
Well, they probably don't exist now, but in those days, and I'm talking in the 1970s, so I was 1967, in the 70s and maybe even in the early 80s, it was just a shop where you went along and you took a book, you borrowed a book, and you gave one back. So there was no money exchanging hands. I guess, do you know the idea of porn?
Yep.
Not the sex porn, but pawning something, that kind of idea. But yeah, just really sharing resources. In some places in the UK now, you have these red phone boxes that are now out of use, and people stuff them full of books. And it's like a little miniature library in a village area, that kind of concept where people would share basically.
Yeah, I love that idea. We've got a similar thing that has been going in and out of fashion for the past, probably say, past decade, where very similar concept, this kind of community library type of thing. Um,
That's
but
it.
but yeah,
Yeah.
you'll notice in this podcast, I get distracted easily, and I'll ask completely random questions of you.
But
Um,
to your point just there about jumping in and not knowing about it, I am not, my background is a degree in languages and an MBA. I'm not a data scientist. I have been involved in technology for all my career, but I'm not teaching people to code. I'm helping organizations to apply AI to their business, in particular their marketing, their sales, and their HR. I'm showing them who to turn to, how to prepare, what the landscape's like, and so on. So it's quite different sitting here and pretending to be someone who's going to teach you how to go and code in TensorFlow or Azure or whatever it might be.
right, right, right. And, that's actually an interesting point. Your background as, would you say, as a linguist? Would that be
Well,
fair and accurate?
initially, I mean, I'd say it's now as a business consultant. Yeah, I mean, a linguist to start with, and then an MBA. So as a master in business. Yeah.
And so, with that background, and essentially that lens on how you view the world, and that's your formal education, um, how did that flavor your view on artificial intelligence and how you
Hmm,
communicate it to clients?
that's a really good question. I've always loved words. I'm a bit of a grammar Nazi. I love, English. And unless you became a librarian or a journalist in those days, an easy thing to get into was really, public relations and marketing. So I've come up, my career and my business consulting career, with that lens, the lens of someone who is writing. And I've seen, with AI and machine learning and different automation tools, just how powerful that is. Because still today there are people who are used for their knowledge of deep technical language, but many of those jobs have been automated. And the same, even I've seen with MSN, actual automation of the job of a copywriter and so on. So I
Yep.
brought that to my world of comms and PR and marketing, and deeply studying French and German both at literature level and a language level. I was able to really consider all of that and the work that gets done in NLP and some of the other technologies under that family umbrella of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and artificial intelligence is really interesting because it's not one of these technologies that has just showed up on the scene. We've been talking about artificial intelligence since the 50s and 60s, right?
We have. Yeah.
And, what I like about language is, very similar. And obviously, the time scales are not the same. But in relative to, what we see in the technology world, you take languages and the evolution of languages and the evolution, compare that to the evolution of AI. And you can definitely see some parallels. And, at least, you had mentioned French and German. What I was actually fascinated about that I had no idea until I actually looked into it and was learning it is that a language like German is extremely close to English, and there's a lot of from a historical perspective, there's a reason for that. It's because very early days in the UK, that's who settled there, and so some of the base language words are actually German originated
It's
words, which
fascinating,
is
isn't it?
which is
Yeah,
fascinating. I had no
it
idea.
is. And I watched a program on Netflix called Orthodox, and was fascinated by the Yiddish and how close to German the Yiddish was. And given, the
Right.
whole history of the Second World War, that fascinated me as well. So anyway, yeah, very, very interesting.
And so with that, I think that's a great segue into when we start talking about the history of these things. How do you define artificial intelligence?
Hmm. I would say we are talking not just of one technology, but a family of technologies that falls into that computer science realm, where really, once it's what you're receiving, once you're dealing with, is indistinguishable from the human. activity, whether that's listening to somebody on a, some kind of automated assistant over the phone, or something that you're dealing with on a chatbot on a screen. When once that's indistinguishable from a human being, and once the machine learning is, learning itself and teaching and so on. So it's a family of data science, AI embedded tools that are enabling that kind of activity to happen. That's really what I would say.
Yeah, I really like that, you said that, it's not just one thing, it's many things. And, oftentimes, I look at it the same way. I almost conjure up visuals of like a family tree. And, artificial intelligence, personally, I view it as more of a marketing term,
Hmm.
because it's such an umbrella term for lots of different things. And, I instantly kind of get into a kind of a taxonomy type of thought process whenever I think about it. Because, on one side, you have the Terminator variety of artificial intelligence, where, the end of times is coming. And then on the other side, you have the very practical, the very real where we're at right now, more in this, what is referred to as narrow AI.
Absolutely.
And even within that stream, it further breaks out. And, to keep things simple here, typically, I think of it in, three major forms. And obviously, as you go, the tree gets bigger and bigger, the
Mm,
branches and all that. But, supervised learning, which is, essentially finding patterns in things and images, etc. And we see a lot of this whenever you do, let's say, a Google search, and you say, "Hey, find doggies and kitties," and Google goes out and they do a search and they find images with doggies and kitties. That's a simple example.
completely agree. Or in your narrow AI example, you might be talking about some kind of device that can go and clean your floor. You might be talking about a robotic arm in a catering environment that's flipping the burgers, but not the singularity you referred to there, where one AI can do everything. The Yale and Oxford University report said that, within X number of years, AI will be able to do everything, but that doesn't mean one device will be able to. There are thousands of
Yeah,
tools on the market, which again, with a narrow AI environment, are able to do certain things. And that's what I cover in my book. That's many of the case studies bring that to life. How do you do that in marketing and sales? How do you do that in HR? How do you do that with robotic processing? How do you do that with natural language processing and so on? So, as people are gathering just how diverse that actually is.
yeah, totally. And and even with kind of some of our examples that we give, it just gives some of the variety of the types of AI. And whenever I would do keynote presentations, I would kind of flippantly say to the audience, how many of you have used artificial intelligence today? And ask folks to raise their hands. And there would be a good, 25%, 30%. And then, I would respond, hey, really, all of you have. If you've checked the weather, if you've looked at your Facebook feed, LinkedIn, etc., uh, there's algorithms being used in the background.
Yeah.
And, like you said, Katie, in a form of, another form of that narrow AI reinforcement learning is really where, the robotics field is starting to blow up right now,
Mm,
where, companies like Foxconn that, make these. Um,
mm, mm.
Completely replacing their staff. Well, not completely, 60,000 people only, uh, with robotics and
Yeah.
smart robotics that are able to program themselves, have their own network with language, etc. So it's fascinating stuff. But I agree. This whole singularity event brings up a lot of questions in my mind. And as someone that focuses on marketing, for you, what do you think about this whole, artificial general intelligence that is kind of the super brain that's on par with human beings or exceeds?
Mm.
What, how do you position that? How do you think about
Yeah.
it?
So I have my views, and obviously they're dramatically colored by the views of people like yourself and Max Tegmark and many, many other incredible brains that I interviewed for the book. And the consensus was that nobody really knows, and that we all anticipate that it could well be likely, but if so, we're talking at least 25. Most people said 50 plus. Um, and that, what does that mean? That will be beyond my lifetime. So some of the work I'm doing at the moment, I'm involved with the all party parliamentary group, which is a task force in the UK government looking at the adoption of AI in enterprise. And I'm involved in programs around skills and closing the skills gap for school children, and so on. And I've got children of 21 and 23. I would like to be a grandmother, and so I'm quite interested from a legacy point of view in there being a world that they can safely inhabit, and do so in a way where they're still motivated, and they have, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self actualization. So when I think of robots taking over many of the tasks that we do, I would like to think that that's capped where possible, such that there isn't drastic unemployment. I believe there will be a period of underemployment, and we will evolve, and the jobs we do now will change, and we will do more tasks. And that I would hope that many of the things we just described would take away the dross and the routine and the hard slog when you're a working mum and you come home after a week at work, or even an evening, and you've got to still prep the veg, clean the house, not just mum, parent, anybody. So for AI to be able to do a lot of that for us, for it to automate my job as it stands currently and enable me to do a slightly different job in the future, that's what I'd like to see. I don't want to see robot warfare. I don't want to see, humans being redundant and stupid in comparison to the brain of an AI. That bit I hope, doesn't come true. And if you listen to, Alibaba and Jack Ma
Yep.
and Elon Musk, they've got two ends of the spectrum there, and neither of them really know how it is going to pan out. But I think we all need to play a very active role globally, where the computer scientists communicate, the business people, the regulators, the academics, the business people like us. We need to play a role in how that pans out. And I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I actually sometimes struggle with this as a hobbyist futurist. And the reason why I say that is, I struggle with trying to make predictions more than 10 years out,
Mm,
even 5 years out. You start to get into what I lovingly refer to as rainbows and unicorns land, and
mm,
you know what we've found, generally speaking, whenever we try to make predictions, we're not very good at it.
no.
Maybe over the next couple years, yeah, we are better, but the further out in time you go, the worse the chances are that we're going to get something right. And so I look at this very pragmatically. I think that people should think about scenarios. So
Hmm. Hmm.
don't try to think about the one future, but think of different permutations. What if these types of events happen? What would
Hmm.
that lead to as far as AI is concerned? And I
I
think there's a
completely agree.
lot in the in the business world that we're setting the stage for what that platform will ultimately look like. When we look at things like ethics and how we're building AI today and what's allowed, what isn't allowed, building those foundations, it's very critical that we are very thoughtful and diligent about the long term ramifications. And sometimes that is hard from a business perspective because most businesses are incented to think quarter to quarter or maybe to
Yes.
the end of the year. So that dichotomy is tough for them as well.
I
Um,
completely agree with you. And, if you think of the Gartner hype cycle, I think there we need to, many of it saying here, you've got all the new technologies that are on that runway, And then they're at that peak of paranoia and inflated expectation where we were a few years ago with AI and machine learning. And then I found very much when I look at my book and the case studies in there, the companies that were using it as innovators, some failed, many had a backlash, some found that staff weren't prepared and they didn't communicate well enough with them and they were frightened. Clients found some of what was being done gimmicky, and failures occurred. I'm thinking of banks and so on. And
Yep.
so they fell into that trough of disillusionment. And as you say, what's hard to predict is, are we talking 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? When's that plateau of productivity going to come? And then another point, which I'm really interested in, is we are really still debating AI at length. And in time, does it just get consumed into general computing? So whether it's, Microsoft Office or whatever the future iterations of that are, people, will they care anymore how things are done and what the technology is behind it? We don't care how our all the apps on our iPhone work, do we? We're
No, we don't
interested
care.
in all of the benefits that that gives us, the access to our friends, the mobile banking and all of that. And so I just kind of wonder at what point all of this isn't hype, but all of this fascination in the technologies dies down a little bit. And then are we more interested in the new technologies that are on the runway? So it's quite
Yeah.
interesting.
So yeah, and as you know, this visual, I'm no stranger to. Uh, I think this was the last hype cycle that I built for Gartner, that we're seeing, and going through this process is interesting. Um, Plotting these technologies, understanding what the current impact is in the industry, predicting what the future impact is, etc. And so, you know, I think when you look at this, there's a couple things that I would highlight. Is one, you're absolutely right. There is this immersion that AI is being baked into almost everything. And
Hmm.
this is not only from a software perspective, but also a hardware perspective. And so, in some of these places, we don't even realize that there are algorithms that are happening in the background. And in my opinion, that's how it should be. Uh,
Mm.
Consumers shouldn't care if they're using AI or not.
Yes, agree.
But
Hmm.
also, another complexity here is there's this convergence effect. It's not just any one technology. What
Hmm.
we're seeing is these AI technologies being blended with IoT technologies, with
Totally agree.
AR, VR, MR, blockchain, etc.
Mm.
And in some cases, like within the blockchain world, AI is built in. AI is what makes it blockchain.
Mm. Mm.
And so it makes it very interesting and makes it very hard also for folks in academia that are, or like a Gartner that is doing this analysis when the lines are being significantly blurred between these technologies. And what is really a AI platform as a service when now I'm baking in other maybe non-related services, but I package it up in a way that
Yeah.
consumers want to use it.
You're absolutely right. And, I'm saying you're right in saying that the consumer doesn't care, but the businesses need to care,
They have
because
to
if
care.
let's say you're a CMO, for many years you've gone to your CTO or your IT department and they've been the ones that have purchased the kind of technology that's now being used or needs to be used by your teams to do your job properly, whether that's a tool for your digital marketing, something doing your sentiment analysis, something helping you with your email marketing. AI can help you with that. So all of a sudden that job has shifted where the CMO is buying technology tools. So they're treading on the toes of another department. And therefore, as a board, as a management team, they're all having to look at this and say, these technologies are changing the face of every department in our organization. And if we don't take advantage of them, we're going to be out of business in 5 years. So, from a business point of view, you've got no choice but to digitize and to, look at your business transformation. But you're right, from a consumer point of view, do they really care?
No,
No.
and they shouldn't. And and you're absolutely right. It's absolutely vital that these concepts that technology leaders specifically need to understand that these effects are happening in the marketplace.
Yeah.
We need to get our workforce better prepared to be able to build solutions, to be part of this AI community, but also how we make our technology choices and decisions will dramatically change based on the type of AI workloads in which we're thinking about using. And very
Exactly.
simple example is if I'm going to do some supervised learning type of activities, that's going to be heavily GPU based because it's graphic intensive, and that's a really good solution for that.
Mm,
But if I'm looking at maybe a reinforcement learning based solution, or if I'm looking at maybe GANs, generative adversarial networks,
mm,
where you've got two algorithms that are going head to head and competing for a specific result. Um, then I need to evaluate different types of solutions and hardware that accompanies that. I'm going to look at
mm.
custom ASIC or FPGA technologies that can help me from a hardware perspective and optimize for those solutions. So these technology leaders
Absolutely.
most certainly need to understand not only the options available to them, not only build up their readiness within their organization, but also for these vital decisions that they're going to be making. They could very easily go down the wrong path if they don't understand the characteristics of these AI technologies.
Absolutely. And there's some great research, and it again, it tallies with the output from my book that looks at the down the left-hand side, the different industry sector like telecoms, high tech, and so on. And then across the top, how are they using that in which department for what function? So you have, for example, a British telecom that's actually using the AI more for its actual maintenance and servicing and scheduling, where it's using predictive analytics and mapping weather patterns and saying, well, when it gets really cold, the broadband lines are down, we've got to get X thousand engineers in a van ready to go out and do repairs, compared to, say, go across and look at marketing and then scroll down to the retail chart. And then you're looking at a brand like TGI Fridays that is able, using a tool like Amperity, to stitch together billions of bits of data so that they can personalize the marketing for 4 million guests of TGI Fridays. That's cool. And that's all AI, but it's all different business functions. So I find that quite interesting. And in my work, I'm, not just from my book because it's a year old now, but, up to the minute, based on, the great work Microsoft are doing, and others, look at how AI is being used in insurance, in hospitality, in restaurants, and so on.
Yeah, and what I really like, about the book is the actionable guidance that is baked in. Lots
Mm.
of recommendations, lots of use cases and examples, but also there's this notion of a scorecard.
Mhm.
Maybe tell me a little bit more about this scorecard notion because at least my perception of it, it's kind of like a calibrator of where you're at in your AI journey, and it's going to help you understand what you need to do next. Is that the
Yeah,
intent
that's
behind
a
it?
great idea. Great way of phrasing it. So the idea is that, you've read this book, you've got all these case studies, these vendors, these major brands, all these insights. We need to pull all of this together. And at the end of the book, people need to be thinking, or even whatever chapter they land on, how do I take those learnings and go away and prepare? And so you have 10 sections to the scorecard, and you're giving yourself in each of the 10 sections a score of 0 to 5. So you have the option to score 50 points. If you score 0 to 20, you're traditional. If it's 20 to 35, you're transitioning. And anything from 35 to 50, you're transformational. And so I'll take you through, I won't go through all of it, but a couple of flavors of that really resonate with the CEOs and the people I speak to at conferences, that you need the right mindset. And actually, Mike, if you think about it, this scorecard is as relevant for a pandemic like now, a future pandemic, for AI currently, or any future technological transformation. What's our mindset? How agile are we? How open are we to change? Do we have the buy-in, number 2, from the board, from the management team? Even if they don't understand it, do they recognize the importance, and do we have their buy-in and therefore their budget and so on? Let's just not jump into it in a really tactical way because the rest of the world is doing so. And this was happening a few years ago. Let's create a business case. Let's have a problem for AI to solve. And in so doing, we need a proof of value, we need a proof of concept, we need experimentation. And then we need to collaborate, interdepartmental collaboration, sales, marketing, HR, finance, legal, IT, they've all got to be part of this journey. And then things like, do we reskill? Do we hire? Do we outsource? Do we go to a major vendor like Microsoft? How do we get started? And then what's the culture of our company? Do we have the right kind of culture? And then the last few really are, we need to innovate. 9 is really important to me in the scorecard because it's about the wider impact of ethics, AI for good, equality, um, you know, transparency and so on. And then the final one is our roadmap, our plan. So, that's a brief, broad brush overview of what it covers.
Yeah, I really like it. And I think anytime we can give people these types of tools to really help them understand what are some of the big questions that you need to think through and answer, definitely helps people get their mind wrapped around, a particular topic area. And in this case with AI, since it is so complicated with so many different technologies, it's important to get kind of that base understanding. And
Mm.
you probably see this. People will go through it and they'll be like, "Oh wow, I didn't think of this. I didn't think of that." And
Mhm.
now it's opened up these all a whole new set of challenges that they didn't realize that they had. Um,
Exactly.
and like you said, the book, is a year and change old. Um, for the updated resources, do they go to your website to get those updated resources?
Absolutely. AIinbusiness.co.uk is the best place to go. I mean, I have Zudicas.com, but that's more of my PR and marketing. But AIinbusiness.co.uk, and I'm putting up their recordings of keynotes. Probably like you, I'm living on Microsoft Teams and Zooms, and I'm running
Mhm.
loads of free, webinars and so on. And they're all the keynotes and the talks, and I'm, on lots of people's podcasts and guesting and so on. So yeah, it's good. It's up to the minute. Each day or a couple of days, I prepare something new. I'm going out there and I'm finding what's out there on the market and new case studies, new statistics. Because as you say, there's a little bit of finger in the air guesswork going on there.
Yeah.
And I don't believe AI is anywhere near being deployed at scale, but there are, particularly in sales and marketing and HR, some very, very interesting usages of it.
And surprisingly enough, in the consumer world, there's actually more examples in the consumer world with consumer technologies than there are with business technologies. At least that's
Mm,
what I found. So having on these devices here, having a custom AI chipset baked right
mhm.
in, and it's been there for the past what 2 versions, 3 versions. Um, to some of the applications with the now the virtual personal assistants don't necessarily work all that great. At least I don't think they work all that great at the moment. They can recognize my voice, but they don't know what the heck I want.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah. I want that to work though, don't you? That's something I really want to work. The ambient voice, the voice control, the virtual assistants, I think could be a really interesting development in the coming years if it really works.
For me, I think it's a little bit of that, but I want kind of this mixed experience. I want
Mm,
the room to know that I've entered the room. I want the room to know that I only got 4 hours of sleep the night before, and I want the lights at a certain level. I want it to understand the context, and there are things that I think are natural for me to verbalize, but I want, the AI to act on my behalf. And maybe it's
absolutely.
because I'm lazy. I don't know. But it's, I think that the real opportunity is not only having the virtual personal assistants where you ask and it responds, but also maybe I walk in and, you might see a home pod over here to my bottom left, maybe on the
Mm,
screen. Um, I want it to just, as I come in the room, hey, good morning, Mike. Would you like me to start the coffee pot for you and brew you up a nice cup of coffee that
yeah.
you like? I would love that level of interaction.
Yes, absolutely. And your point a few moments ago about the intersection of AI and other fourth gen technologies like IoT, the sensors that you just mentioned, for that, for your temperature control and lighting and those really important things. I think when we've got the mix of those different things working well, then it'll be fantastic. I wrote the book, and that was the irony. I wrote the book and I had a lot of 1 hour Skype calls, and then at the end I was trying to do great text to voice transitioning, and
Yeah.
I was getting about 60-70% accuracy, so I just had to do it manually. And I was writing this book about AI and all this wonderful technology, and it was failing me. So it wasn't quite there a year or two ago, but things have moved on quite a bit.
They have
So
moved on, and I think that the macro point that you're making, I think, it's vital for people to understand is that AI at the end of the day is a data science technology.
mm,
And the AI is only as good as the data that you can give it. And
yes.
so if you've got sensor technology that isn't able to get accurate temperature readings or, presence or GPS, or in your case, natural language processing, if it's not able to get that, then it's not very useful to the AI
Mm,
algorithm. And so I think the key here and why I when I look at AI, I still look at it. It's still very early days, and
mm,
part of the reason why is as an IT industry, we're not very good at data handling, standardization, making sure it's clean. Yeah, we've got more data than
yeah.
we've ever had in the history of humanity. That's great and all, but big data without big insights is a big problem.
Yes,
Um,
you're right. And your point earlier about the AI winters that we've had, those 6-7 decades of since AI first came to as a term in the 50s. Now we've got it's viable because we've got the cheap processing power, and we've got X years of smartphone technology and all of the data points. We've got that, but we've still not always got the glue that sits in between it, or the structured data, or the ability to get those insights. And for quite a lot of the CEOs I'm working with, some are already quite far advanced and are out there specking and really trying to get to grips with AI in their businesses. They're saying, for me, it's a wild west, and the glue is missing. And that's where I think there's great business for the major vendors like Microsoft, because there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of these technology disruptors who've cropped up because the venture capital space has allowed them to, and it's exciting and it's viable. But often they're competing, with thousands of other tools, and the poor chief marketing officer or HR director is doesn't know where to turn. And
yeah,
so I think there's just great scope for major organizations who can package this up together into APIs that are very easily accessible, and multiple tools all under the banner of your AI for your marketing and your HR, rather than me having to go and purchase and do my due diligence on thousands of individual tools. So, it's an interesting space, and I'm sure it will level out a bit in the coming few years.
yeah, yeah. As far as your conversations with executives, what have you gleaned from some of those experiences? And more kind of on the business executive side, what are some of their top concerns when you talk to them about AI?
Mm. A big one is the lack of regulation and standardization, and a fear that, is this where we should be putting our money? So that's one, is that piece. The trade bodies, the governing bodies, the regulators. It's a bit of a work in progress at the moment on that side of things. The security, cyber security, accessibility, those kinds of issues as well, and a feeling that Is this where we need to put our money? What about all of those other technologies that are coming up on the runway? Is this obsolescence in a few more years? And so a feeling of, again, regulation and standardization and interoperability of all of this. Is it ready? Are we too early? And obviously, some are innovating and others are still digitizing. So I think it's stages for companies. Some are way ahead and prepared to make mistakes and innovate, others are laggards. And some, I'm still going out to parts of the world training them on LinkedIn. Some companies are still getting to grips with basics of social media and standardizing their digital technologies. So those kinds of issues are some of, and then of course skills.
Yeah.
Do we need to hire? Do we retrain our staff, our workforce? Do we outsource? If we outsource, they don't have the domain knowledge. If we do it from within, are we able to afford the kind of data scientists? So all of that, and they're in such demand, it's not always easy to get to them. So quite a lot of barriers, actually.
Yeah, and I really like your point around the talent gap. Uh, right, wrong, or indifferent it may be. You know, the talent that we do have out there that are experts in AI, very competent in this space. Oftentimes, they don't work for the end user companies.
Mm,
Oftentimes they work for a consultancy or they work for a big vendor, and that's challenging
it
for
is.
these end user organizations. And so they're left in a situation of, if they're competing against Amazon as an example, they've got to compete with the resources of an Amazon, not only from a market share perspective
Mm,
and a thought leadership perspective, but also from the talent that they have access to. So it really puts
absolutely,
folks at a
completely agree.
disadvantage.
Mm.
And it's a precarious situation that folks are in right now when it comes to the organizational readiness to be able to support these technologies. Because the CEO could be like, yeah, I want to be an AI company, but if he or she doesn't have the staff to be able to build those solutions, I'm sorry, but it's not going anywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, hugely challenging and quite concerning. I'm sure that's what's keeping a lot of them awake at night, over and above, of course, COVID and so on.
Right. Yeah, and as far as some of the you'd mentioned, the data standardization, some of the security challenges. Are there specific areas of fear or anxiety for these executives around the security aspects or the ethical aspects, like specific areas?
Yeah, I mean, there is within GDPR a clause about explainability. So I know that quite a lot of people are, again, from a lack of full regulation perspective, concerned about the ethics piece and about transparency. And in the TGI Friday example, needing to get consent from these millions of customers and guests before they can do the work that they need to do. And a lot of people's databases got drastically cut, because of GDPR. So, cybersecurity is one thing, but also the compliance piece is another. And when new laws and so on, and when it's still a work in progress, that's quite a tough one to get your head around. So, yeah, absolutely.
And is that some of your work with the all party parliamentary group? Are those some of the things that you guys focus on in that group?
Particularly ethics.
Yeah.
So we are this, again, just being completely focused here, this is about parliamentarians fully understanding AI and machine learning and being fully briefed so that they can then take that to their constituency and so on. So this is a task force where we virtually at the moment, and we had on thousands of people on the last one, looking at AI's impact on education, AI's impact on business, and how people all around the world in different governments, in different organizations are using it. And sometimes that's an academic viewpoint, sometimes it's a business viewpoint.
Right.
And AI for good, ethics, equality are all hugely debated in that sense, which led me, and it goes live on Friday, and I have two Microsoft people delivering one of the sessions for me. We have a project which is about closing the skills gap. So it's two pilot schools, and it's about AI in education. It's about teaching young pupils, and they're sort of 15, 16, 17 year olds, how AI is reshaping the world of work and society over and above the curriculum that's taught to them with regard to data science. They're not all studying data science. Some want to go into football, the law, construction, so all different careers. And this is a series of 6 initially virtual sessions delivered by Microsoft and PwC, myself, the Alan Turing Institute, and others. And it's really just an initial pilot, which is going to get really high profile over the coming month. And it's about closing that skills gap. And I think all around the world, companies are going to want to start collaborating with educators and businesses to do this. It's just so important because it can take a long time for governments to amend a national curriculum.
Yeah.
Maybe a smaller country, a nimble country like the United Arab Emirates, maybe can do that more quickly. But, if we can fill that gap by offering these kinds of sessions, I think it's really valuable.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think I'm very passionate about, and maybe this is because I've got 3 kids under the age of 12. That our future is really educating our kids and making sure that they really understand these technologies. So I try to be as active as I can in our STEM programs here in my local school district. I think that's very important for us technologists to kind of give back to the community, because at the end of the day, as whatever country that you live in, that's your future, right? You're skilling up your future. So the more we can
Absolutely.
get folks understanding these technologies, and even the
Mm,
teachers,
yeah,
a lot of times
absolutely.
teachers, these folks are stressed with their existing stuff that they've got to do, and now layer all this stuff that they have no idea about. So any way we can
Exactly.
help, especially the teachers, make their lives a little easier and really scale their capabilities, I'm all
Exactly.
for it.
And making it inclusive as well, because we'll have deaf students on it. And if we run it on Teams, we will be able to deliver a lecture, a session, and have simultaneous
Yep.
subtitles, which is really cool. So, use the technology for the diversity and inclusion and so on. So, it's great. Yeah.
Totally.
And like I said at the very beginning, when I'm 53 and these kids are like 16, 17, but my daughter's just finishing uni, we've all got to be on that journey of continuous learning, because our degree can become not redundant, but out of date very quickly in the new tools. So, great technologies, great platforms that enable us to keep personalizing and learning and growing and, you know, having skill sets that are fresh, that are not based on a 30-year career that now AI can do elements of, but it's about our humanity, it's about our creativity, our complex problem solving, all the things that make us human. And so, what the World Economic Forum says are going to be the key skills we need for the next 10 years, none of those are about data science.
Right.
But as a business, knowing we need those skills combined with these tools that are AI tools and other kinds of tools that can effectively do that augmented intelligence. That's what I like. Forget artificial. This is man and machine working together. Whether you're a barrister, a marketeer, a footballer, there's some tools out there that are going to really enhance your performance.
Yep.
That's what I like.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, couldn't agree more. I've got, like I said, I've got twin boys that are 12, and they asked me maybe a couple months ago, oh, well, we'll be done with school by this point. And, I had to, say to them, guys, school never ends. And I'm not going to let you get into that mindset that, there's a fixed period of time for learning and then the rest is doing something else. no, you're always learning. Never get stale. And so I think
Yeah.
that's another thing that we have to bake into our children is that these old constructs of, well, you do this education or that education, then you're done, and then you go into your job. No, you're always learning.
Absolutely. But how lucky are they? Because the tools they have to learn are so incredible. And as you say, as a teacher, there's AI that can help them with the administration pieces. There's personalized learning that can be done using other kinds of AI related tools. I just think they're very lucky because they have such incredible tools at their disposal. And that's only going to get better. And that's part of my other piece is that ability to democratize an incredible education all over the world. Today, we're talking Black Lives Matter, and I don't just mean black, but any race, any
Yep.
religion. I want that ability, and I know this is a important subject for for a brand like Microsoft, but to make that accessible is so important. Really strongly believe that.
Oh yeah. I mean, being able to um, essentially where you've got situations, and I'm not sure how it works in other specifically in other countries, but within our country, there are certain school districts that just don't have the funding and the support that they need,
Mm.
and technology is a great equalizer, where
Yes.
we can, in these inner city schools where they traditionally haven't had the teachers and the ability to get access to information, where we can do things more virtually and give them the same quality of education as someone that is in a neighborhood that is able to fund their school in a more rich way. So I think
Absolutely.
you know the more we could do that, 100% agree with you. I think that's vital. Now, switching gears a little bit, um, another big issue is what we're all living through right now. Well, one of the four crises that we're dealing with right now. Let's talk about the global health pandemic. Um, so I have to ask. So with COVID-19, how has AI and in this whole AI space impacted your view on how we deal with this problem?
Yeah, really, really good question. So, I mean, there's a number of ways. I know for a fact that AI is being used to speed up dramatically some of the drug discovery. I know we're not there yet, but it is helping many of the labs and many of the medical, practitioners to really try and focus on the right kind of trials. To know that this algorithm can diagnose cases in 20 seconds with a 96% accuracy. So, ranging from drug discovery through to, for example, warning people, who's likely to have infections in which particular area. And so, as we certainly in the UK are moving into this next phase of the tracing and so on, if we can have lockdowns in smaller, very specific areas, that's so much less dramatic and disruptive. So I think the ability of the AI, to train that data on that infection in a particular area and the symptoms, right up to the big decisions that the pharmaceutical companies are making because it's huge money, and speeding up something that might have taken 50 years before into a year, 18 months, God willing. So, lots of examples like that I'm seeing.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I've seen a lot of those examples in pharma that the analytics capability and the pattern matching is really helping us accelerate what used to be a lot of trial and error work. And I
Absolutely.
think in and again we talked about lots of technologies that are involved, not just AI, but IoT technologies, technologies like digital twin technologies to run simulations on molecules and what their reactions will be, etc. So it's exciting. And I also flavor this with our previous conversation around the importance of data and kind of this garbage in, garbage out sort
Yeah.
of mentality here. Um, in that you're only as intelligent as the data and the knowledge that you're able to feed into it. And so, for an area with COVID where there's a lot we still don't understand, The science isn't proven yet. What sort of challenges or inhibitors have you seen in relation to AI and the pandemic?
Yeah, as you say, it's I have not seen too much related to the drug. Only what I've kind of read on the drug discovery side of things, but it with all of it, it is about the data. It has to be absolutely, and the ability to access that. Sorry, Mike, that's not a very good answer.
No,
I was really distracted because my dog kind of came running up to me, and I've got a thing at 4 o'clock. So I was just sorry, I was just really distracted there. So apologies.
no worries.
Are we able to kind of cut that last bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that there, like you said, there's the garbage in, garbage out, but also I think what we have to also recognize is that there's these ethical questions that you talked about earlier that now are starting to be exposed. Yes, we can contact trace. Is it a violation of our civil liberties to do that? I don't know, maybe. It's not clear.
Mm.
Ethically, should we be, monitoring people to a certain level and degree and analyzing that data in new ways that we've never done before? And so I think, as we start to close out here, Katie, because we could be talking for hours, I'm sure,
It's been
about this
amazing.
stuff, is I think one of the most important things here that we have to understand is that this is new territory for us. Yes, artificial intelligence is, more than, 70 years old as a concept, as a paradigm. However, it's introducing new ways of work that we've never done before because we just didn't have the option to do it. And as a result, there's societal, behavioral, ethical questions that are now exposed as a result. Um,
That's a really, really good summary, actually. You're absolutely right. And I think that's why it's such a fearful area for a lot of people, but also one laden with huge opportunity for others. And, that's where that mindset comes in which way do you look at that and how do you take advantage of it?
yes, and so Katie, if people want to get a hold of you, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can email me, Katie, Katie, at zoodikers.com, zoodikers.com. Probably the best way, come to aiinbusiness.co.uk, and there you'll find all my social media plugins, you'll find my keynotes, you'll find some of my seminars, webinars, and so on. And I love to connect with people. So, yeah, please feel free to reach out and connect with me.
That's awesome. You do a phenomenal job of aggregating all that stuff. I am very jealous that you have been able to do that. I know it's a ton of work and it takes a lot of time, but definitely envious.
I appreciate that.
Um,
Thank you, Mike. It's been a great interview.
yeah,
Really, I've learned loads and I'm learning every day. And that's my final bit of advice to everyone is don't be frightened. Get yourself out of your comfort zone and keep learning and, be on that journey. It's fun.
yes. All right, Katie, with that, thank you and hope to have you on again sometime soon.
Thank you very
Bye
much for
now.
having me. Take care. Thank you. Bye bye.